Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and it's time for another breakfast chat. And today I'm going to explain to you guys briefly why I program and recommend upper-lower splits. And this is basically for everyone other than the ranked novice. I recommend full body programs to the ranked novice, and I would say many of them within 3 to 6 months could switch to an upper-lower program. Whenever clients come to me, all my clients do 4-day upper-lower with very few exceptions, only sport-specific exceptions. And the only other thing I would generally recommend other than that would be, in some instances, technically a push-pull legs done 3 days a week, with the caveat being that basically they're squat, bench, and deadlift days. But I don't recommend that necessarily for most people either. I think you're going to do better on an upper-lower, but I do know some guys who are insanely jacked and strong who do the other, basically even with linear type periodization. And when I say strong, I'm talking 800-pound squat range. I know at least one guy who does that personally. So this question came up because I got asked 2 questions yesterday. Number one, in my comments, I had someone say, hey, upper lower doesn't make a lot of sense. It makes more sense to just do all your back with the lower and just do your show muscles on their own days. And I'm going to disagree with that. I'm going to disagree with that a lot from a recovery perspective. You just get too beat up and you're too exhausted by the end of the other workout because you're working 80% of your muscle mass in one day and 20% in another. And again, it's very hard on recovery unless you space them out better. And again, we can get away with certain amounts of rowing sometimes on a lower day, and I program it that way sometimes for my people who need a lot of rowing volume, but that's specifically on rows. If they're doing other stuff besides rows for middle back, I don't ever program it that way for them. I really don't. Like if they're doing pull-ups, chin-ups, stuff like that, I'll throw it all into their upper body day, and I'll put the rows in there with it. And the other question I got asked is, hey, what do you think about someone doing the overhead press 3 to 4 days a week who really needs to get strong at it? No, I don't recommend that either because that falls outside of this paradigm. So why do I recommend 4-day upper lower? It allows us to evenly work approximately half of the muscles in our body each workout, right, of the total muscle mass, barring isometric and other involvement. Okay, barring that, it allows us to do it. And it allows us to train every muscle directly twice a week, which is going to be close to ideal for frequency. Frequency can vary a little bit from there, but it's going to keep us close enough. And if we balance volume correctly, that can always be the ideal frequency. Again, if volume is matched appropriately, because that's the main thing we're looking at. And it allows us to do 10 to 20 work sets per muscle group per week, which again is optimal. If we're training hard, really hard work sets, that's optimal for hypertrophy. And again, we want maximum hypertrophy if we want to maximize strength. It's necessary. All right, and it allows us to not do more than 10 sets in a session for any given muscle. It allows us to limit that while still getting those volumes higher because we're doubling up. Because again, you start looking at data, when we're doing hard sets, exceeding about 10 sets in a workout produces less muscle growth. In studies that have looked at it, multiple studies have found that to be the case. If it's done in a single session, like if you do 15 or 20, you grow less. Less is not more in that case. So again, if you need more than 10 sets a week, you need to split that volume up. So, how does it allow us to do this? Well, some people will look at it and say, well, that seems like there's more work sometimes on an upper body day. And that's because you're pushing and pulling, right? You're doing all sorts of pressing. Sometimes some smaller exercises, some single joint stuff is needed, right? Depending upon where your weak links are. And you're doing pulling. But it's all upper body pulling. It's middle back. It's upper back, things like that. If anything is used, it's a minor partial or an isometric. What do we mean by that? Standing presses. Lower bodies use isometrically. A pen lay row, even though it has good carryover and it trains the posterior chain to set up for the deadlift, it's all isometric contractions. The only exception might be if you're doing a little push pressing or some hang cleans or things like that. You are getting a little bit of lower body involvement, but it's all partials. Okay, it's partials and it's not necessarily getting a lot of effective reps. So you should still be fresh for your lower days. And if you go over to lower, if you think about it, people will say, but the back gets really involved. Only isometrically, and I'm not saying isometrics don't matter from a recovery perspective. The thing is, if you have fatigued your lats and everything on the upper day and you do a lower the next day, it's not a big deal because you're contracting them isometrically. They're not having to be primary movers. Now, granted, the lats get used a little bit on the deadlift. There is some movement, but it's a very small partial, and most of the work is done isometrically. Same for a good morning, right? The back is used isometrically. We don't bend the back on a good morning. It's all isometric. Same thing with a squat. Scapular retraction, stability, everything else. Again, all isometrically, so it's reversed there. So really it's not the same thing as we're not doing a lot of dynamic movement on the upper body if we're squatting, deadlifting good morning, and we're not doing the same thing, for lower body on the upper days. And it allows us to do this. It also allows us to have a day off after every lower day. So again, if you do an upper, then you do a lower, then you could have a day off on the lower. Any way you break it down, even if you don't ever take 2 days off like I do, because you guys see me do upper Monday, lower Tuesday, upper Thursday, lower Friday. I always have a day off, but other people space it a little different where they don't ever really have 2 days off. What do I mean? Well, they might do Sunday and then a day off, then Tuesday, then a day off, then Thursday, then Friday, and then Saturday off. And some people choose to load them up like that, especially guys doing a max effort type. Some guys like to do it that way with a day between each max effort. And that's acceptable if you want to do it. But the point is, the system allows you to have a day off after every leg day. And that's a problem when you see people who are like, oh, I'm going to do upper, lower 6 days a week or push, pull, legs 6 days a week. They're training again right after a lower day. All right. Unless you're willing to up the dose, bro, I don't recommend you do this. Not ideal. Now, the other thing to think about, again, I talked about the total exercises. Some people might say, well, you tend to do more sets and exercises on the upper day. Isn't that imbalance? No, because those muscles are generally only stabilizers for the other. People use words like stabilizers. What do they mean? Well, the bicep is a stabilizer on the bench press. And people say, well, dumbbells make you use more stabilizers. Yes, you use more bicep for the dumbbell press than the barbell, right? The stabilizers you're talking about, the bicep is an example. No one's ever built massive jacked biceps doing dumbbell chest presses, to my knowledge. They're all stabilizers for each other. Okay, and about the same amount of muscle mass is work. It's lighter total weight because we're not rowing and benching as much as we can squat or deadlift, and even good mornings. I can't do any of those with even the weight I can do on a good morning. Okay, so we're moving less weight, and we need more exercise because we're working smaller muscles with a larger amount of functions. There's just more functions involved in the upper body. On the lower day, if you start looking at the total volumes and tonnages, they tend to be very similar. Yes, we might be doing less total exercises, but a lot more weight is moved per exercise, right? A lot more weight is moved. It's more fatiguing to your overall system, and the muscles overlap. That's the problem with the push-pull system, where people think that they're separating it out. Not really. If you're doing a push-pull type setup, even if push-pull legs, their idea is, oh, well, because we're working different muscles, but you're not. The only muscles you might be working at slightly different ratios is going to be the quads versus hamstrings. Okay, but a lot of your squatting movements, the hamstrings do get some involvement. Almost all of your lower body pulls, the quads get used. Quads get used on the deadlift, particularly a deficit or a sumo. Quads are a primary mover. Right? You're not removing the quads on the pull work. They even get worked pretty hard on the good mornings to some extent, even though it's a partial. They're getting worked hard. Things like the glutes and the hips get used on all of it. So pushing and pulling for the lower body, so again, like squatting versus pulling, we're not separating things out the same way because there are massive, large muscles that are primary movers, like, again, all the hip extensors. Any muscle involved in hip extension, which is an enormous chunk of the muscles in your body in terms of muscle mass, adductors, abductors, glutes particularly. The glutes are getting hit on everything. So you're not really splitting things up. That would be like saying, well, we do that with upper body, but then every single exercise, if you were to split the upper body up, was a chest exercise, right? Your chest would be getting worked on every workout. But in this case, like the glutes and the hips get used every workout. So splitting it up, because the functions are not as spread out as far as the muscles used, a lot of these muscles stay primary movers all the way through. So again, what this allows us to do is to actually separate things to a larger degree into only when they're used on a primary mover or they used on that specific day. They're oftentimes the muscles in the other half of the body are only used isometrically rather than dynamically. And that matters. It lets us get days off, and it lets us always get a day off after a lower body day. And after oftentimes squatting and deadlifting, a day off is warranted. We generally need it. So this system works very, very good. There's a reason so many champions use it and so many top-level coaches program this way in multiple sports. It's a reason for it. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.